Pikmin 4 is finally here! As an old fan, playing through Pikmin 4 brings up a lot of memories of the first time I played the original Pikmin game after its release way back in ye olde times of 2003. I wonder how Oliver's doing. I bet he's doing wonderful since he got back from— Oh, is that him? Is that Olimar? What happened to him? How do we go from a game about collecting treasures and fruits with little carrot men to whatever this is? Maybe the answers I'm looking for lies in the first game itself. Surrounded by a world too big for Olimar to imagine. The cozy, comforting music that had a fun, rhythmic, percussive beat that was oddly hypnotic. Simple plants and blades of grass towering over you on this strange world. But for our small pal, Captain Olimar, it was no mere vacation once the meteor crashed into his ship and sent him down onto this planet, stranding him. Olimar immediately got to work figuring out how he could repair his ship, the SS Dolphin, which he was lucky enough to land very, very close to and for it to not be in a bursting ball of flames. But it could not have been that simple for the little guy, right? Think about yourself in this situation. How would you process everything that's happened to you? His stay on this distant planet would soon become something much more harrowing than he first thought it would. The environment around him was unknown. Danger could be around every corner. The oxygen in the atmosphere was poison for him, and he had at most 30 days of supplies to survive. His many years climbing up the corporate chain from mechanic to engineer and now to piloting and owning his very own ship has taught him to be resourceful. He was determined to make it back home to his wife and children. Scouring his immediate surroundings for anything that could be of use for him. He crafted an axe from the remaining metal on his ship to cut down some plants nearby to build a shelter for himself. Just enough to give him a quiet hideout from any nearby predators, a shabby excuse for a home. Dusk would soon fall, making him uneasy as the ground around him shook and trembled. Foliage in the area started to shift and sway with a thin rustling wind blowing through. This strange world became alive the moment the sun started to set, filling his mind with the truth that he was all alone and isolated in the dark. Somehow he passed out, probably from pure exhaustion. Soon he woke up to a quiet, peaceful morning, the light cascading through the grass blaze that held his tent together. His home planet's diet consisted mainly of veggies, and he was not much of a hunter. So he fell to his knees to dig around, trying to find anything resembling of something familiar to him. The starving captain almost cried as his hands brushed against something all too familiar to him, the stalk of a pick carrot protruding from the dirt. Jumping to his feet, he tugged and pulled. His stomach groaned as his mind filled with the many ways he knew to prepare a meal with his favorite food. But something was different here. It was fighting him. He got a firm grasp on the stalk, leveraging himself and quickly lifting with what might he had left, falling to his back as he finally yanked it from the ground. He shuffled to his feet and heard a strange sound, quickly turning around just to see—
Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello.
Sorry, I got a bit carried away. Olimar's story always made me think about the survivor aspect more than anything, and I started to go into the stories of Alexander Selkirk in my mind. Someone who had what some would say a little too much poetry written about his time stranded on an island in the South Pacific Ocean from 1704 to 1709. Olimar's tale isn't exactly the same as his though. He's stranded on a planet compared to an island, and he's got these silly little guys called Pikmin to help him out. They become an anchor of sorts for him, his means of escaping his dreadful fate of isolation, just like the feral cats befriended by Alexander Selkirk. When he offered them the plethora of rats that would attack his shelter in the night. Whenever I play through the original Pikmin game, this side of Olimar's tale won't stop popping up into the back of my brain. How absolutely frazzled is Olimar's brain during his stay on this planet? With 13 minutes of daylight per day for only 30 days, the timer is ticking down to his potential death. If this intrusive thought doesn't come up at least once while you're playing Pikmin, I don't know if we can be friends. It leaves so many questions unanswered, such as what did Olimar tell his therapist about his experience with complete isolation? And we're not talking about that one night of the week where you give yourself just a little bit of me time kind of isolation, as the world outside your window screams and burns. Olimar crash landed on an unknown world, playing a solo game of Survivor in an environment that is literally toxic for him. How could we possibly understand what level of panic he has to be going through? Being a wonderful, dedicated scientist, Olimar leaves notes of what he sees at the end of every day, even when nothing really happens. The captain's log is the key to giving us a little peek into his personal thoughts and fears. We just have to do something to encourage the darker thoughts to take over. Recreating the most helpless scenario for Olimar by staying in the zone known as the crash site. I can't say it any faster, else I'll say crash shite. Recreating a helpless scenario for Olimar by standing in a zone known as the crash site for the whole duration of the game, making no progress whatsoever. No ship parts, no money things, not even the piggy bank. Is that enough though, one might ask, to give us a true sense of being in his tiny little shoes? I would hope no one watching this had to be a survivor of a crash landing, but if you are, that's really cool, and I hope you've got a cozy blanket with good vibes in your life. The rest of us have to look at documentation of people's real-life experiences, and the little visit that Alexander So Kirk had to a tropical island with an endless supply of cat content to keep him company doesn't quite compare to the endless void of space. Where on earth could we go to try and understand the mental and physical effects that would soon take over Olimar? A place so separated from civilization that it becomes the definition of isolation itself. Well, I know just the place. Come on, we're gonna go to the South Pole. The endless freezing cold tundra wasteland. Hooray! In 1956, the US government was brainstorming for their future contributions to the coolest science fair in history, the International Geophysical Year, an international scientific endeavor that lasted from the 1st of July 1957 to the 31st December 1958, consisting of 67 countries that participated. Another significant world history event was just ending as 1956 rolled around. The Cold War, you might have heard of it, and these countries created the IGY to help build human science and understanding. The area of studies conducted during the IGY consisted mainly around Earth sciences, including the case we're going to take a look into to help us understand Olimar's situation, the initial winter assignment. A team of 18 men led by Paul Sipple and Lieutenant John Tuck were going to be the first long-term residents of the South Pole, Antarctica, for an entire 12-month year-long period. This ain't no overnight Airbnb stay. Paul Sipple, a veteran of the Arctic, would later recant the group's experience in a memoir he would title Living at the Pole. We were like men who had been fired off in rockets to take life up on another planet. We were in a lifeless and almost featureless world. However snug and comfortable we might make ourselves, we could not escape from our isolation. So far, it seems pretty similar to the situation Olimar is finding himself in. Just a little difference in weather, since Olimar landed in what could be seen as the field behind your house. Meanwhile, these guys are stranded in an endless tundra. The Navy team experienced nature so grim and stark that our lives could be snuffed out in a matter of minutes. Every day would bring us new problems to solve, and our ingenuity would be taxed over and over again. These guys were staying in a perfect pocket dimension we have on the planet to truly develop some traumatization and mental illness. Surely if one of these men experienced some form of mental and physical wear during their time at this station, then Olimar should have as well. And just in case you need a little more convincing on the severity of the elements they faced, on September 18th, 1957, there were recorded temperatures outside reaching negative 77.2 Celsius or negative 107 Fahrenheit. A layered blankets, a warm fireplace, and the company of some little carrot men aren't gonna get you through that. In fact, studies since the team's departure from the base have continued to this day in the same location, at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. Like most things the American government touches, it's got some dark history to it. The members of the squad's ability to handle their new lifestyle varied from one individual to the other. The group got by like most men who are secretly repressing their emotions do, by poking fun at the situation. Fellas, it sure is dark and cold here in the 6-month-long period of black eternal winter at the South Pole. But you know what's worse than this? Being stuck at home with the wife and kids because it's 1956 and they don't have as many rights as we do. Ha 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 ha. Several of them would later be diagnosed and treated for anxiety and depression. Shocker. I do have to credit them for a wonderful joke though. During the time of the base's construction, they found the magnetic South Pole and built an outhouse on top of it. Imagine taking a dump on the South Pole. The scariest result of the isolated environment's impact happened 10 years prior to the initial winter assignment during the base's initial construction. A member of the 1955 team developed a severe case of psychotically paranoid behavior, or paranoid schizophrenia. With what medical crew they had, they were unable to recover this person to a functional state of mind for the remainder of their expedition. This individual became such a disturbance to the mission and other team members that their only option on site was to sedate and separate them. They constructed a room adjacent to the infirmary and lined all surfaces with mattresses, not only for the patient's safety, but also to try and suppress the screams and cries he produced. I feel like this is an important time to bring up the fact that the members of both the 1956 and the 1955 teams had to go through Navy-based medical and psychiatric examinations to be allowed to come here, meaning that each one passed the standard psychodiagnostic biographical questionnaire in order to create a self-sufficient team for their upcoming isolation. For one of these men to crack on the ice when passing this kind of inspection means their levels of anxiety and stress had to be as high as the sky above. Or it could be due to the time's lack of understanding of human psychology and physiology. It is the 50s after all. A man named E.K. Gunderson of the Naval Health Research Center made huge strides in our understanding of behavior-based selections for assessment of individuals. He was one of the leading researchers to help improve the process of how team members were evaluated before being assigned, meaning he knows how to test if your brain's working. Gunderson specialized in researching the nature and degree of stress experienced by people who had been to the Antarctic. He found the most common traits were minor emotional disturbances and mental decline, but on a rare occasion, psychosis and severe neurosis would occur. The most important work Gunderson would develop was the defining of 3 primary behavioral components of effective performance. Each of these were meant to grade an individual's own ability to work in an isolated environment. If you were to be a member of the 1956 team, you were graded on these 3 qualities in various ways: emotional stability, task motivation, and social compatibility. He's basically the reason we don't allow people that want to do a bunch of murdering in the Arctic to go there. And we can use these 3 categories to help us grade our little captain during his stay on PNF 404. Under the presumption that Olimar would have been graded on similar qualities, considering he's at a level in the Hocotate Freight Company that deems him worthy of captain, and he's able to pilot his own personal ship. The only reason I'm comfortable making that claim is based on the fact that all members of both the 1955 and the 1956 expeditions were. Also, a little fun fact about these guys: all applicants for these kind of missions were from both military grade and civilian volunteers. One of the members of the 1956 group was a college kid. Alright class, before we start today's lesson, we have a notice from the Navy base down the road. They are requesting volunteers to venture to the cold wasteland of ice and peril, where the sun is only present for 6 months of the year, and the other 6 it is a pure void of darkness. Tina is now handing out the brochures they sent, and if you are interested, come see me after class. I believe the only reason Olimar doesn't initially break down from the sheer shock factor of his situation are the Pikmin that he encounters. The Pikmin are his only means of progression, since Olimar's only contribution is being a leader that organizes them. So what happens when we take the Pikmin away from Olimar? What do we have left? A tiny, weak shell of a man that can't even beat up a shear grub on his own without getting hurt. And the devs at Nintendo made this even more apparent, giving us the 3 variations of how the game can end, based on how much you accomplish. If you get all 30 parts before time runs out, you get the happy good ending, where everything is hunky-dory and Olimar doesn't have to leave behind his piggy bank. If you only gather a few parts but it's just enough to make it run, you're still able to fly. It's cool. Don't worry, you can make it back home. Barely, but you make it back home. So what happens if we don't make it? If we don't collect enough parts to make his ship fly? Is it just the game over screen so I can just go back to the main menu and just try again? As the sun sets over the tall brush that surrounds him, the world around him stirs once more, as it has every night for the past 29. Olimar writes in his log, "The day when my life support system fails has come. I have only collected a few ship parts. I have no choice but to attempt to launch the Dolphin into space, incomplete as it is. The ship doesn't need every last part in order to fly. For better or worse, I must go." taking what he believes is going to be his last chance to look back at the world that kept him trapped this past month. Hesitant, but determined to at the very least try, he stands in the light beneath his ship once more, ready for whatever the outcome may be. Checking the remnants that the skeleton of his vessel can show, he lifts off while the Pikmin watch, ever curious from the surface below. Somehow, it's working! The ship is moving upwards into the sky. Olimar can see his children's face now, but we don't make it. Everything goes still right before he plummets back to the ground. Get 'em, girls! Now, as fun as it would be to do a psychological analysis of Olimar's mental state across all of his journal entries, the first game alone has a total of 71 to go over. Each entry will only appear if certain requirements are met. In other words, you won't get the log of Olimar saying, "These little bastards can burn," if you don't see a Pikmin get hurt by fire. So what if we just do nothing then? If nothing is done, there will be nothing to write about, right? Wrong. This is his hecka diary, my guy. When left alone and isolated with no progress made, we get to witness a slow, snail-paced descent of Captain Olimar as he consistently meets with one thing: death. This leaves us focusing on the 27 miscellaneous entries that you get to see when nothing new is really done. These entries contain Olimar's thoughts and feelings, reminiscing of his life back on Hocotate, his family, his career, and even those darker thoughts that pop up into his mind at night. If you stay put in the crash site for every single day, you can get the 27 in their numbered order. And as intriguing as it may seem to go over every single one, I promise you, we can shift out some of the weaker entries. Just as Gunderson probably didn't care for the long line of boring people that can't work with a group, I don't really care to sit here and take far too long to explain how Olimar doesn't want to be a Pikmin baby daddy. This brings us down to around 5 or 6 entries that we really want to focus on to help us evaluate Olimar's time on planet PNF 404. As I mentioned, the 27 entries can be seen in a specific order when you stay at the crash site and nothing is done, so we'll be referring to those numbers when going through each one of these entries. I wonder if I shall ever be able to escape from this world. How much suffering must I endure before I can finally see my family back home again? Off to a great optimistic approach, aren't we here? Journal entry number 2, on his second night of being a castaway, Olimar is still hopeful to get back home. His experience and wisdom shows since he can recognize the mortality of his situation, but it's not slowing him down. By this time, he's probably gone through several outbursts of panic, since by now in a normal playthrough, you've helped Olimar discover the Forest of Hope, and the many bulborbs, pellet plants, sheer grubs, and other creatures that you could find in there. There would have been new discoveries to help distract him. Still, when my heart grows too heavy, I take comfort in my efforts. I will get home, or I will expire trying. And yet, Olimar is still holding on to his own mental anchors, something I mentioned briefly before. Anchors are thoughts people will either find in the truth or make up entirely for themselves to help keep their mind grounded as they try to understand the situation in front of them. If anything happens, he can always trust his own work ethic and brain to find a way out. At least that's what we hope Olimar's telling himself right now, because he has to fight off the reality of his potential future that's settling into his brain at the moment. Okay, that's a pretty simple start. Just a normal case of someone justifying their own reactions to a moment of panic. It's good to know that Olimar at this point is still showing signs of mental stability, because he's able to think of the one thing that he can do in this situation to achieve the best possible outcome. He's thinking positively, and not setting his sights on what could possibly put his mission at risk. Jumping forward 10 more days because the writings between now and then just contain observations of the world around him and Olimar's own thoughts about things from his old life. Besides, we're more interested in finding when Olimar doesn't pass the 3 criteria set out by Gunderson and his mental assessments. At first glance, the Pikmin have such innocent faces, but this is misleading. They can actually be surprisingly whimsical. After leaving the group, they dig up plants on their own and frolic about, sometimes never returning to the onion. Oh, this is so nice. Olimar's making friends with the Pikmin. How cute. Even in his most dire moments, those little guys are bringing him just enough joy and silly antics to get by. He started to become more concerned for their well-being and taking notice of different traits about them too. They're not just the mindless drones they first appear to be. You know, when you whistle them to charge straight up the rear of mini bulborbs, where the danger is. When I find none following me, I begin to worry. I must pay careful mind to their movements. Okay, Olimar, word selection is very important. Notice the change 10 days made for him. He's becoming a little more dependent on the Pikmin rather than himself. There's no mention of his family or his own solidified anchors like the entries before, as he grows more worrisome over the potential loss of the new social group he's found. The writers did push forward a minor narrative that Olimar begins to think of the Pikmin as his own children, kind of like the player should. So let's observe what he says as a guardian watching over their child. One calm, collected, and good loving parent would probably see their child running around in the yard, but they don't pay much mind to them, because there's no physical sense of possible danger. Olimar is not in that situation. We are not at the family reunion barbecue with all the Pikmin, and there is no pool party. We're basically at the halfway point now of his estimated 30 days of survival. No progress has been made on fixing his ship, despite his own efforts, stuck in the same location for basically 2 weeks. Olimar says when one of his Pikmin goes missing after a while, he gets really concerned, but I don't think he's really being truthful with his words. Paranoia is slowly warping his mind from the frustration that his lack of progress is bringing. His survival instincts could be on the verge of going feral. I honestly believe this is the turning point for our captain, when he really starts to lose that sense of light that he had in the first few entries. I might even go as far to say this was foreshadowed in his 9th journal entry. With the knowledge that we're going to the end of his life, that entry in combination with number 12 can show that he's starting to crumble, claiming that the Pikmin are starting to alter his view on the situation. It could be possible this new world of his is slowly turning into a beautiful and loving home. The Pikmin are creating a new form of social compatibility and complacency in his time of desperation, and his dependency on them is becoming obsessive in nature. Oh, come on. You're just blowing up your own theories for dramatic allure. It's Pikmin. Well, hold that thought there, buckaroo. We still haven't gotten to the 16th entry in the captain's log. I can't help but hear a slow, hissing sound inside my head.
You did not just say that.
It seems that the stress is causing the last of my hair to fall out. My wife always warned me not to let the little things bother me, to prepare for the bigger things instead. Very well. I shall heed her sage words. We've hit the beginning of the second half of Olimar's countdown till he expires, and things are looking just peachy. His stress levels must be at the 100th ceiling, since his physical hair is falling out, something that should be only happening to those under torturous levels of imposing mental anxiety, or a member of a capitalist society. One good thing to note here, he's keeping his mind focused on his wife's advice, taking comfort in her words. There's still a little bit of life left behind those beady little eyes of his, which is honestly a fleeting, heartwarming moment in this peril penthouse that is Olimar's mind. It makes me wish we could give him those fabulous heals Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz has, and he could just heel click his way home. Normally, we would have met the yellow and blue Pikmin at this point, which he can't, being stuck at the crash site, probably having over 100 of each type of Pikmin by now. Even if it was just one part collected a day, he'd have a feeling of confidence with 15 parts of his ship found. We didn't even get to celebrate Smokey Prog's birthday. And yes, now that you mentioned it, I did read the first line of this entry, just as you did, and yes, it's a real thing. He's got tinnitus, but at least it can't get much worse than this for him in one night, right? Right? This shall be the last time I count my precious, precious strands. 1, 2. Olimar, are you getting much sleep? I'm really gonna need some good vibes, since even empathizing with him at this point is kind of stressing me out. Thankfully, the writers don't get to add in something to this line, like the whispering hisses of the damned life forms that visited this poisonous rock before me are in my ears. I'm honestly convinced he's actually experiencing that maybe in this moment as a part of his existential crisis. The second half of his entries is when we really start to lose Olimar as his mind begins to convince him that life here wouldn't be that bad. With only 14 days left until he's out of time, it's getting more and more difficult to think fondly of his return to Hokkatate. The results of all the stress and anxiety he's experiencing are starting to formulate to a similar thing that Gunderson and his compatriots studied about human psychology and physiology in the Arctic: the 3 effects of isolation. Let's not confuse it with the previously mentioned 3 behavioral components though. This Gunderson guy loves his threesomes of mental stress. The 3 effects of isolation start with the individual effect, one's capability to process their surroundings in a positive, clear way, or the inability to do so, and suffering the outcomes of mental instability. It's very clear that by the halfway point of his 30 days, Olimar's mental stability is as frail as a pre-cooked noodle, the physical result being the loss of his hair. Next is the captain's reaction to the space that contains him and his adaptation to it, the available free space effect. Something more acute to being confined to a small space, the size of a space shuttle, for example. But it's also apparent he's not adjusting well to the constrictive zone of the crash site. And lastly, the most intriguing of the three, since it's full of undefined possibilities, post-operational long-term effects. Similar to the initial winter assignment team's slow loss of morale and their buildup of anxiety and depression, the effects of the environmental exposure he's experiencing for even just a month on this planet is astronomical. How would he react to leaving this planet's environment and atmosphere after being trapped there in a race against time once he returns to Hokate? The mental trauma would be equivalent to those that have experienced PTSD, and his life back home could not be the same as it was before the crash landing. Knowing this, what hope is really left for Captain Olimar now? I suppose I have done well to get by without much motivation. I have made it this far without any hope. I must do all that I can with what time I have remaining. Vigilance, Olimar. Vigilance. I don't have much to write today. When I inspected the onion's legs, I saw that they were covered by tiny little hairs. It was kind of disturbing. I feel it's important to briefly examine the end of Olimar's vacation before we get to the final entry I want to go over. Olimar is truly at his wit's end. He's at the verge of giving up. It's a pitiful last attempt of a pep talk to himself, and it's not filled with talk of his family or life before his crash, like entry number 2 and the others were before. There truly is a lack of the spark in his words that once was there. Not even talk of the Pikmin or his children back home. He's even lying to himself with the first sentence he scribes into his captain's log, and day 27 is no better. There's nothing left in this little guy. He's completely devoid of all hope at this point. All the stress, worry, and isolation in the past month of him being stranded on this planet has finally capsized over him entirely. The dread, the regret, the exhaustion, it finally got to him. We know what comes next here.
Oh, we can still ask.
Where did Olimar really lose all hope? What was his turning point? We saw that entry 16 was really a point of no return for him without some sort of outside intervention to Olimar's psyche. The voice in his head telling him it's hopeless, the sense of anxiety and fear, it was all there. What would you quantify as the signal point for yourself if you were in this situation? Day 1, the crash itself? Or maybe you found hope all along the way until the very end. You turned this into something greater and more beautiful than we could understand. Everything that he has endured over the past month must have made his life a living hell. Where did it start? I'm always intrigued as to whether or not such a vast number of Pikmin can truly sleep inside such a small onion. There he is, the Olimar we know, ever curious of the unknown, and the subject of his queries falls once more to the Pikmin. They've gotta cheer him up. Even in this situation we forced Olimar into, being stranded in the crash site, the Pikmin are the last sign of life and curiosity in Olimar's mind. In fact, what are the Pikmin? They have this array of funny little sounds that at first glance are so animalistically unintelligible, similar to that of the sounds your cat might make at you. Olimar even points out to himself the simple facts of life with the quirks of the Pikmin. They really are like children, one would think. Maybe the key to understanding Olimar's mental state lies in that direction of thought. They seem to have some sort of intelligence when they have a leader to guide them about, but when alone, they stand idle till you call them back to the task at hand. That's the whole purpose of the game, after all. Gaining knowledge of the Pikmin and how to use them in the best ways. Olimar has to be thinking this too, right? What sort of vessel is it inside? Does it somehow transcend the laws of physics? Yes, Olimar, that's right. Be scientific, be curious, think like your good old self. One could make the assumption the onions have some sort of capsulating state for holding the Pikmin inside. We can see them shrink down upon entering when they're climbing up the legs into their home. Maybe Olimar's gonna try to explain this himself. What you got for us, buddy? Just once, I would like to have a chance to see for myself. Olimar, what are you saying? We can't go in there. The onions are creations worthy of their own mysteries, but you really want to go inside one? What would happen to a non-Pikmin if they entered that unknown chamber? It's something I don't really want to think about for myself, but maybe he's got a point. Days have passed since I began my search with the Pikmin. They are an ever mysterious life form. They grow like plants do, but they are also mobile and active like animals are. Individually, they seem weak, but in truth, I am beginning to believe that they could be an exceptionally mighty species if properly organized. Yes, Olimar, that's what we were thinking. They seem so jovial at first, but the Pikmin, what could be beyond those little beady eyes of theirs? A breed truly at the crossroads of something greater. The combination of plant and animal into one form, one body. But how evolved are they? Where did they come from? I have grown used to my life here. At times, I even find it quite bearable. I know that as soon as I return home, I'll once again be subjected to the daily ridicule by my despicable boss. Yeah, Olimar, this world, although scary and mysterious, it's got its own beautiful charms. It's nothing compared to your old life back home, though, where your family and your children are. Maybe we should just give in to this fate of ours and enjoy the last moments we have before the supply runs out. What am I saying? It's only the 21st, right? We still got time. Come on, buddy, we got this. Even if it's not every single part, we can still get the dolphin to fly straight out of here. I bet we can. Right, Almar? um, Captain? If only I could be a Pikmin. I think we found the day Olimar truly lost his mind.